My name is Winnie, and I currently hold an office worker position, a role that I reached after navigating a series of personal and familial challenges. These issues mainly stemmed from the complicated relationships within my family, particularly with my mother, with whom I've had a strained relationship since childhood. This strain was partly because of her stringent nature and also because I bear a resemblance to my father, Melvin, which seemed to exacerbate the tension between us. My father was a kind and honest man, qualities that baffled me as to why he chose to marry my mother, whose primary grievance against him was his modest income. Despite his stable job, my father also harbored aspirations of becoming a cartoon artist, a dream my mother scorned. Nonetheless, his presence was a stabilizing force during my upbringing, and he always supported me, especially concerning my fraught relationship with my mother. As I grew older, our family dynamics shifted dramatically. When I started university, the relationship with my mother worsened, culminating in her decision to divorce my father. She had grown close to a much younger bartender from a nightclub she frequented, a man who would later become my stepfather. His demeanor towards me was dismissive at best, often flaunting his relationship with my mother in hurtful ways. After graduating from university, I struggled to find employment, which forced me to continue living at home with my mother and stepfather. During this period, my mother became pregnant with my sister Isabella, who was born when I was 25 years older. Isabella was undeniably adorable, and despite not resembling our mother, she quickly became the center of her world. My mother often compared us, openly favoring Isabella and predicting a beautiful future for her, in stark contrast to her treatment of me. Life at home became increasingly difficult. My mother, now mostly unemployed and absorbed in Korean dramas, demanded that I take on significant caregiving duties for Isabella. Despite the challenging circumstances, Isabella turned out to be very intelligent and was admitted to a prestigious private kindergarten. Meanwhile, I was earning just enough to get by, without any additional support, living a life largely isolated within my own home. A pivotal moment occurred 6 years ago when I was 31, during a family trip to an amusement park. It was a day that underscored the stark disparities in our family. My wealthy stepfather, driving us in his Porsche, celebrated Isabella's acceptance into a prestigious elementary school. Throughout the day, the conversation revolved around Isabella's future prospects and achievements, highlighting the different expectations placed on us by our parents. This trip was emblematic of the broader challenges I faced within my family, showcasing the contrasting paths my sister and I were on due to the differing degrees of support and expectations from our parents. During that moment in the car, my mother and stepfather burst into laughter, and I sat there stunned by Isabella's cruel words, echoing the bitterness of my mother. That day at the amusement park, they continued to sideline me. On the roller coaster, they rode first, leaving me to ride alone while mocking my fear, joking that life had been tougher on me than the ride. In the haunted house, they went ahead and waited at the exit just to laugh at my fear, commenting on how embarrassing it was to have me as a sister. This behavior was more than enough for me to want to cut ties with them, but the final straw came during our car ride home. I mentioned I needed to use the restroom, but they cruelly suggested I wait until we got home or use the bushes nearby, mocking me further. My humiliation peaked when my stepfather abruptly hit the brakes, claiming he mistook a stuffed toy for an animal, causing me to accidentally let a little out. Their reaction was harsh, criticizing my mistake, with my stepfather saying his Porsche was now dirty and even going as far as to deny my place in the family, likening me to an unwanted relative rather than his stepdaughter, or Isabella's sister. My mother then cruelly suggested I leave if I was so unhappy, claiming she no longer wanted to see a face that reminded her of her former husband. Isabella smugly added that she was happy to be an only child, echoing their sentiments. With my patience exhausted, I decided to leave, no matter how modest my new living situation would be. I moved out of the luxurious apartment and into a rundown one. Although this new place freed me from my toxic family, it was old and not what I had hoped for. I should have saved more before moving, but I needed to escape. In this gloomy period, a surprising letter arrived from my father, breaking years of silence. He apologized for the lack of contact and shared that despite his challenges, he was managing. Reading his words, I realized he was the only genuine person in my family. Meanwhile, I hadn't mentioned earlier, but I have a fiancé named Devin. We met at an inter-industry networking event and now live together. Devin, who works steadily while pursuing his dreams, has never judged my past. He's been nothing but supportive, and he was enthusiastic about moving in with me, despite the simplicity of our apartment. Devin even suggested I visit my biological father, noting there was an address on the envelope. While I'm hesitant because my father hasn't explicitly asked to see me, the thought of reconnecting with him, given everything, feels like a step I might soon be ready to take. I've been thinking it over, and I feel it might be too soon to reach out to my dad. Even though I'm curious, he might have a new family by now, and I don't want to intrude until he's ready to reconnect. Instead, Devin suggested a less direct approach, maybe just catching a glimpse of him from a distance to start. That seemed reasonable. It's been 17 years. He's bound to look different now, and I wonder how he'd react to seeing how much I've changed too. So, I decided to discreetly check on my father this weekend. Rather than loitering outside his place, I thought a nearby diner would offer a good vantage point. Thanks to Google Maps, I confirmed there's one right across from his apartment. It's amazing how technology makes these things so straightforward. From what I could see, his life seemed much like mine, unpretentious and modest. He was still chasing his dream of becoming a cartoon artist, a tough path indeed. Observing him from afar, it was clear he hadn't given up, despite the disheveled hair and wrinkled clothes that spoke of his ongoing struggles. It was a tough sight, seeing him look so worn and defeated. Suddenly feeling overwhelmed, I decided to leave the diner without ordering. I couldn't shake off the image of his weary expression. If he had seemed happy, maybe I'd have approached him. Devin suggested maybe I should send a casual letter to see how he responds. It's a small gesture, but it might open a door. Returning home, I was taken aback to find a letter in the mailbox, from my mother, of all people. We hadn't spoken in 9 years. Not since the day she harshly sent me away. It was shocking. Why would she want to reach out now? The letter inside was even more astonishing. She was asking to visit me. What could have prompted this change of heart? Devin and I speculated about her sudden desire to reconnect. Could she be regretting her past actions? Or perhaps something more urgent was at play, like a serious illness. It was a confusing and concerning development. How did she even find my address? It seemed likely she might have used something straightforward like the family registry, which wouldn't be too difficult for her to access. Despite my reservations, I agreed to meet her. If she was indeed ill, it seemed right to at least see what she wanted. With the visit set for next week, the anxiety was palpable. Asked Devin to be there with me, needing his support. Finally, the day arrived. After a restless night, the thought of seeing her after all these years filled me with a mix of dread and curiosity. True to form, I expected her to arrive as flamboyantly as ever. As I anticipated my mother's arrival, I couldn't shake the thought that she'd comment dismissively on the simplicity of my living space. That's just how she is. Despite wishing she'd just leave quickly, a part of me also dreaded her coming at all. It's a complex mix of emotions. Just as I wrestled with these thoughts, the doorbell rang, snapping me back to reality. With a nervous hand, I approached the door and peered through the peephole. Standing there wasn't the flashy, overbearing mother I remembered, but a figure who seemed frail, dressed in subdued clothing. So different, it was startling. "Winnie, it's been a long time. I really wanted to see you," she said, her voice weaker than I remembered. "Mom, what happened to you? You've lost so much weight, and these clothes..." I couldn't hide my shock. Was she ill? To my surprise, she apologized right there in the hallway. "Winnie, I was wrong. I want you to forgive me for everything I did to you." Bewildered by her sudden change of demeanor and confession, I let her in and introduced her to Devin. As we started talking, she began to open up about her recent hardships, which were linked to my stepfather. "He got caught up in a scam and was arrested," she explained. This was the man who always seemed flush with cash, mysteriously affluent for a bartender. It turned out his wealth came from shady dealings in gambling and stocks. As we delved deeper into her story, I learned that the strain of these events had drastically altered her appearance and demeanor. It was a relief to learn she wasn't physically sick, but the emotional toll was evident. She admitted her mistakes in choosing to be with him, affecting not just herself but me too. It was a lot to process. Then she brought up Isabella, the sister who had always seemed to have everything laid out for her. With her father's arrest, she's had to leave her prestigious school. Now, she's attending a public school, my mother said, her tone tinged with regret. Despite our rocky past, I felt a pang of sympathy for Isabella. The revelation continued, however. My mother hesitated before dropping another bombshell. There's more I need to tell you about Isabella. She's actually not his daughter. Turns out, during my mother's frequent nights out, she had relationships with other men, including one who was a university researcher by day and a bartender by night. He was Isabella's biological father. Isabella's intellect and cunning, uncharacteristic of her supposed father, suddenly made a lot more sense. Sitting there, listening to my mother unravel these revelations, was surreal. It seemed that the truths hidden beneath our family's facade were as convoluted as the relationships that defined it. Now, with all these new insights, I was left to ponder what all this meant for our future interactions. I was truly taken aback by the revelations about Isabella's parentage. Learning that her biological father was not only a university researcher, but also notably handsome, made sense of the comments about Isabella's looks. But what shocked me even more was the drama that unfolded around this discovery. When the truth about Isabella's real father surfaced, unearthed by a detective hired by my stepfather just before his arrest, it felt like something straight out of a soap opera. It was almost humorous, though in a bitter, ironic way. But the chaos didn't end there. During her visit, after recounting these convoluted family secrets, my mother revealed the real reason behind her sudden reappearance. She admitted, rather sheepishly, that after my stepfather was bailed out, their finances were in ruins, leading her to ask me for money. The audacity of her request left me speechless. There she was, not much changed at heart, despite her less glamorous appearance, driven by financial desperation rather than familial affection. "Winnie, the bail money took everything we had. I was hoping you could help us out," she explained, as if it were the most natural thing to ask. The nerve of it, after all the years of neglect and harsh treatment, to come asking for money was beyond belief. But she tried to justify it. "I've apologized, haven't I? We're family, and isn't this when we should help each other?" Family? When had she ever acted like family to me? My patience snapped. "How can you even ask that after everything?" The situation escalated quickly. She even dared to ask about my earnings and wanted to see my bank book. That was the last straw. I couldn't hold back any longer. With Devin trying to calm things down, I ended up pushing her out the door, along with her requests and her apologies. A week after that tumultuous visit, as I was still processing the events, another letter arrived. This time from my father. With Devin by my side, I opened it, half expecting more bad news. Instead, it contained the most incredible update. My father had finally achieved his dream of becoming a cartoon artist. His work was not only published but also received positive acclaim, leading to contracts for further adaptations, both animated and live action. "Dad, congratulations," I exclaimed, overwhelmed with joy and relief. It felt like a beacon of positivity after the storm. I immediately penned a response, expressing my eagerness to meet him and celebrate his success. He replied promptly, inviting us to visit him the following week. "Let's meet next week. I'm really looking forward to seeing you, Winnie," his letter read. Filled with anticipation, Devin and I arrived at my father's apartment on the designated day. As I was about to ring the doorbell, I heard the lively sounds of children and a woman from inside. A moment of surprise washed over me, but as the door opened, there was my father, beaming with pride. "Winnie, it's been long. You've grown up well. And this must be your fiancé, Devin. You've chosen a fine young man," he greeted us warmly. Standing there, at the threshold of a new chapter, I realized how much I had to catch up on with him. The presence of a family inside his apartment suggested new stories to be shared. After so many years of disconnect, this reunion was not just a meeting but a fresh start for all of us. As I approached my father's apartment with Devin, eager for our reunion, I was immediately struck by voices coming from inside. My heart sank a bit. Had I misjudged the situation? When my father opened the door, he looked both happy and slightly apologetic. "I'm sorry I didn't mention earlier. I've remarried," he confessed. The presence of a new family was unexpected, but explained the joyful noise. After a brief, awkward moment, we decided to relocate to the familiar diner nearby. This time, the atmosphere was more relaxed, and we were able to enjoy a meal while catching up. Sitting there with my father, it felt as if we were rewinding the clock, with nostalgia warming our conversation. I congratulated him on his successful debut as a cartoon artist and his new contracts for adaptations. His face lit up with a mix of relief and pride. It nearly didn't happen. I had quit my job to focus fully on this dream. There was a point where it caused quite a bit of tension at home, he shared. The reason for his prior hesitations about meeting up became clear. He had been waiting until his career was stable before reconnecting. He revealed that the day I had seen him from the diner, looking so desolate, was actually when his new wife had temporarily left with their children, overwhelmed by the uncertainty of his career shift. Fortunately, with his debut success and an increase in royalties, he moved to a better apartment and his family returned and reconciled. "I hope to finally provide a good life for my children," he said, reflecting on his past struggles. "I was an insufficient father before, but maybe this can make up for it." As we discussed, I shared the shocking truths about my mother's past. Even my father, who I thought knew her well, was taken aback by the details. This conversation helped clarify why he had originally been drawn to my mother despite her challenging personality. He had seen potential material for his cartoons in her complex character. As we wrapped up, my father turned to Devin, expressing his hope for continued support despite his imperfections. Devin reassured him warmly, "Don't worry, and thank you. I'm just happy to see your dreams coming true, and I hope for even more success for you in the future." Returning home to our apartment after these heartfelt exchanges, I was confronted by an unexpected and unsettling scene. There stood my mother, her troublesome husband, and a teenage girl who must be Isabella, now much older. "Why are you here again?" I asked, stunned. Their response was typical, tinged with the same old unpleasantness. My mother retorted, "Really, Winnie, you're as annoying as ever." I tried to maintain a calm, suggesting we all settle down inside. The tension hinted at deeper troubles. Rumors of fraud involving my mother and her husband had surfaced, apparently tied to some dubious activities at the nightclub. They defensively claimed it was all a misunderstanding, just minor missteps blown out of proportion. Exasperated, I finally asked, "What do you want now?" It was clear from their evasive answers and the eventual admission that they were seeking financial help to hire a lawyer. "You're my biological child, aren't you? It's only natural you should help out a bit," my mother asserted, while Isabella chimed in, reinforcing their familial claims to coax support. Their real motive was painfully obvious: money. Despite the chaos, I knew one thing for certain: this mess wouldn't touch the life I was building or the upcoming wedding. They were not invited. As I stood in my doorway, facing this unexpected reunion, I prepared to address this new chapter with as much grace as I could muster, determined to keep my future free of turmoil. I've reached a point where I no longer care about the future of these people. Maybe that sounds harsh, but it seems to me they demand far too much from me. During a particularly tense moment, one of them dismissed Devin's intervention by questioning his right to speak up, belittling him as just a regular employee. I was on edge, ready to react heatedly, but then the atmosphere took a sudden turn. "Excuse me for saying this, but like Winnie's real father, I also have big ambitions," Devin declared, his voice steady. "Even as I approach my 40s, my dream is to pass the bar exam and become a prosecutor." His goal was indeed a noble one, drawing a mixed reaction of doubt and surprise from the group. Just as I was about to let my frustration show physically, Devin caught my hand, stopping me. He continued, I aspire to be a prosecutor because my father works in the prosecutor's office. This revelation noticeably shifted their mocking tone to one of cautious interest. As they tried to leverage this new information, pleading with Devin to intervene on their behalf by appealing to his familial ties, I made a silent, firm decision to remove them from my apartment. Days later, I attended a special party hosted by a publishing house to celebrate the release of my father's new book. At the event, which included my father, his new wife, and their children, someone asked about my mother. We've cut ties, I replied. That part of my family doesn't matter to me anymore. It was a hard stance, but one I felt necessary. Interestingly, my father's book debut was a cartoon about a character remarkably similar to my mother, a housewife with a domineering personality who alienates those around her. This unique story caught the attention of many, including a publishing editor. Ironically, my mother, thinking she was the inspiration, contacted me demanding compensation for being portrayed. It was no surprise. She hadn't changed a bit. Cutting ties seemed more justified than ever. Later, I learned that my stepfather was prosecuted and received a life sentence. My mother, needing to make ends meet, took her first formal job as a hostess in a bar, a place introduced to her through the nightclub connections of her husband. Isabella, on the other hand, continued her studies within the local community, hoping her efforts would eventually pay off. Meanwhile, Devin and I have grown closer to my father's new family, even moving into the luxurious apartment he owns. We've built a deep bond with them, and as we settle into this new chapter, we eagerly anticipate the day when Devin's dreams of becoming a prosecutor come true. This new familial connection, forged in the face of past difficulties, promises a future filled with hope and the potential for redemption.